The 28mm lens is the awkward kid in a class photo. It's not as dramatic as the 20mm or even the 24, but at the same time it's also not as flattering as the 40 or the 50, and yet it somehow still manages to sneak into most camera bags than either of them. Why, if you ask? Convenience, because it's usually the smallest and the lightest lens out of them all. It's also usually reliable and your grab and go lens. You can pull it out, take a shot, and then shove it back into your bag and get on with your life. Or even better, if you have the Ricoh 3, Ricoh GR4, or even the Leica Q2, Q3, any of the internet popular everyday camera nowadays has a similar focal length to the 28mm. And yes, you can also say the same for the 40mm, because usually there's also a pancake lens for the 40, as well as recent years, camera companies coming out with like more 40mm focal lengths for the everyday cameras. But here's the thing, the 28mm is not just convenient, it's also very, very versatile. It's challenging. It's a lens that rewards thought and punishes laziness. And once you learn how to tame it, it can give you some of the most immersive, story-driven image than any focal length. By the way, if you find this video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's talk about the first pushback usually people give, and that is you can't shoot portrait with the 28mm. It's too much distortion. And yeah, if you get too close to your subject to the point where you can count their nose hair, then you're way too close and they're gonna look like balloon animals. Instead, you want to step back a little, find that middle distance where you're not in their face but at the same time still be able to feel personal, and suddenly it's different. At this distance, you get two benefits. One is that you still get that slight compression where people look natural. Two, you get an environmental portrait effect where the people is not isolated from their environment and the surroundings. Instead, they're integrated with them. This is where the 28mm shines. The background doesn't just sit there, it participates in the story. All of it becomes part of the portrait. It's way harder to put this off with the shallow depth of field headshot. But when everything clicks, you don't just get a photo of a person, you get a picture of a person in a place, and that becomes part of the memory. And yes, you can argue that the 35, the 40, or even the 43, 45 can definitely, or even the 50 if you will, can achieve the same thing, having environment in your portrait. Here's where I agree and disagree at the same time on that popular opinion. I definitely agree that you can incorporate environment into your portraits with 35, 40, and all of that focal length. However, it always depends on the environment that you're at. If you're shooting on a beach or maybe like a wide open area where there's just not busy and everything just like wide open, then of course you can incorporate the environment if you're using like a 40 or above and still be able to let people know, oh, you're at the beach. And obviously, yeah, it's super easy to say that, but if you're in a very busy street or maybe like in a city kind of like environment to the point where you just don't have enough room or space to back up to incorporate the kind of environment that you want to show, the kind of story that you want to tell with your photo. Oftentimes, there's just no way that you can do that. What I'm saying is that the 28 is just a lot more versatile compared to all the other focal lengths in terms of incorporating the environment in the background for a portrait. And by all means, I'm not saying that all the other focal lengths sucks. It's just the difference is the nature of the lens itself. Now speaking of which, because the 28mm is so wide, you can capture so much in a frame, you want to be able to control what's inside the frame. And the only way to do that, especially with the 28 prime, is to move in and zoom in with your feet. Again, you want to find that middle distance, that sweet spot where your subject dominates the frame. If you step back too much, the whole world floods in and you have to judge real quickly, like what do you want to include in your frame. That control is freedom, but it also forces you to make decisions. That's the 28mm in action. It forces you to choose what stays, what goes, what matters the most to the point where you want to move in close to. Now, wide lenses are notorious for giving you everything sharp, front to back, which sounds great until you realize that everything sharp often translates into everything boring. So here's the advice. Don't be afraid to use low apertures. Open that lens up to f2.8, f2, whatever your gear allows. At 28mm, the bokeh won't be dramatic, but it'll still be enough to isolate your subject and add depth to it. It transforms a flat, everything's equal photo into one where the viewer's eye has a clear place to land. This matters especially when you're close. Filling the frame with a person, a detail, a cup of coffee at 2.8 or 2, this will suddenly make a shot pop in a way where a safe f8 never will. And here's another general rule that you can follow. Whenever you're shooting wide, your subject matters. Wide angle shot live or die by their subject. If you got a weak subject in the middle of like a very busy frame, the photo just turns into chaos. But if you anchor the frame with something bold, whether that's a person, a strong shape, a bright color, or even light itself, then all of the distraction will fade away and the photo just works. So how do you make the subject strong? First, you can play with the light. You can do slight light, backlight, morning, evening light, basically anything that doesn't come straight down like during the noontime. Good light will be able to separate your subject from the chaos. And if you can, try to shoot from the shadow side where the light is hitting from. This way you'll be able to make the whole frame and the scene look a bit more appealing. Another way that you can make your subject strong is by just moving closer. Robert Capa's old line still applies here. If your photos aren't good enough, you're not close enough. At 28mm, that's doubly true. Now the third way to achieve this is by hiding distractions. Put your subject near a wall, shoot through a fence, block part of the frame with like tree branches or anything that you can find. Add a bit foreground elements, or move your camera angles up or down, left or right. And honestly, the blocking technique might be the easiest way because it just simplifies the shots and works like wonders. Now since we're at it, let's talk about layering and foreground magic, because flatness kills wide angle photos. To fix that, you need layers. You need foreground, subject, and then the background. That's where dirtying the frame comes in. You want to use objects up close, a plant, a coffee cup, a wall, anything that you can find to block part of the frame. And that does three things. It adds depth, guides the eye, and hide clutters. At 28mm, small subjects can suddenly become big. A table edge, a railing, a stop sign, anything that you can find on the street or your environment, and just somehow bring it closer to the lens, and suddenly your shot will feel a lot more immersive. The next thing that you can play around with is perspective. The distortion on the 28mm can either ruin your photos or it can make it sing. It all depends on how you use it. You can shoot at eye level if you're close enough to the subject. You can go low and tilt the camera up to the point where you can use your surrounding buildings and distort the lines into leading lines. Whichever way that makes sense for your photo, of course. Or you can also go high and tilt the camera down, and suddenly you're compressing a scene to a geometric playground. The key takeaway here is to just experiment more. Any small shifts in angle will matter way more on a 28 than any other longer focal lengths. Here's one more trick. You want to be careful whenever you're placing faces or straight lines at the corners whenever you're using 28mm, because that's where the distortion are most aggressive, unless you're deliberately going for that surreal effect. If not, then just try to keep your people at the center of the frame. Centering your subject at 28mm often gives your photo more clarity too. You can then balance the wide shot with symmetry on both sides or with similar elements, while your subject is anchored at the middle. It's simple, usually effective, and keeps the chaos in check. To me personally, I find this an easier way for street photos, especially if you want to have those head-on street photos in front of people's faces. Because on a busy street, everybody on the edge are pedestrians, but you have this one person right in the middle just looking straight at you. And that often leads the viewer's eye towards the middle, the center subject. Makes the photos a lot more easier to digest. And perhaps that's also why a lot of street photographers prefer the 28mm, where they are shooting head-on to the subject and placing them right in the center. And oftentimes close enough where you can feel that you're in front of the person, like physically, when you're just looking at the photo. It's effective, but also very challenging. And personally, I don't know if that's my favorite type of street photography. Tried it a couple times and didn't really dare to use flash, because I'm obviously way too timid and shy to do that heads-on with strangers. Needless to say, still a very interesting way of taking photos.